Hi, welcome to our video sessions about biomimicry life principles. Life principles are design lessons from nature and can be found in all life on Earth. And for each of the 26 principles, we're going to show you an example in the ecosystem of a tree. Just like in nature, life principles are all interconnected. To help us understand them, they are organized into 6 master principles and 20 sub-principles. So, things can change pretty fast. They can sometimes change in an instant. They can sometimes change in a day, in a week, a month, a year, or in the entire lifespan of an organism. How does life react to changes? How does life deal with changes? In this part, we're going to talk about 4 principles, starting with the master principle, adapt to changing conditions, and 3 sub-principles, incorporate diversity, maintain integrity through self-renewal, embody resilience through variation, redundancy, and decentralization. And the examples for these principles in our ecosystem of the tree are the way a tree grows, depending on gravity, gravitational forces, the way that some bees are able to incorporate the diversity of flowers in the changing of the seasons, the way a hollow in a tree is able to maintain itself over time, and the way that resilience works in the life system of a soil. So let's start with the master principle, adapt to changing conditions. We'll take the example of our tree and the positive and negative geotropism. What does that mean? So a tree, of course, wants to grow to the light. It wants to get as much light as it can so that it can use its process of photosynthesis effectively. How does it decide where to grow, what direction? It tries to grow exactly away up from Earth's core and down into the roots, exactly down towards Earth's core. So that's positive and negative geotropism. But what happens if conditions change? What happens if a tree grew on some slope and it grew perfectly upwards to the sun, but then there was a landslide and suddenly the tree is totally sidewards? Well, the tree has the possibility to detect gravity in its cells through sedimentation of small little grains in cell organelles, so it can detect the force of gravity and it can notice that it needs to grow differently now, and it grows upwards again. So it can adapt to the changing condition of the landslide. What's our design guideline here? Appropriately respond to dynamic contexts. The dynamic contexts that are found everywhere in life on Earth, of light and day, hot and cold, destruction, birth, different physical forces, chemical forces. And of course, in our ecosystem of the tree, our tree always needs to be able to adapt to changing conditions if it wants to survive. Incorporate diversity. Our example for this principle are the polylactic bees. For instance, the honeybees that everyone knows. And the diversity of plants that they have co-evolved with. So there are many different species of bees, and they need nectar, they need pollen from the flowers of plants. Some bees are very specialized on one species of plant, and that plant is specialized on this one species of bee. That's a very dangerous strategy, but in very good times on Earth, it can work to be specialized. But especially if conditions change very fast and very often, it's an extremely good strategy to survive if you can incorporate diversity. Many bees, like honeybees, can adapt to the changing of the seasons. So in one season, these plants flower, and the other time of year other plants flower, and the other time of year other plants flower. And maybe if there was a storm there, these plants lost their flower, but there's the other species of plant over there that also has flowers. And honeybees are able to use almost all of the plants, can actually pollinate and get the nectar and the pollen from all different kinds of plants. What's our design guideline? Integrate multiple forms, processes, and systems to fulfill functional demands. So if conditions change very dramatically, a generalized species like a polylactic bee has a higher chance of survival than a specialized species. And in our tree ecosystem, polylactic bees are very important for the pollination of trees. Also, many wild bees use wood, the old wood, the dead wood, parts of the tree to nest there. Maintain integrity through self-renewal. So what's our example from nature for this principle? Our example is a tree hollow system and the life community that exists in and around this tree hollow, especially the micro-life community. So what's a tree hollow? Just basically a kind of a hole in a tree, and it can be in a tree that's still alive, it can be an old dead tree. And hollows develop in all kinds of different ways. They can just develop because a branch breaks off, but they can also develop through an animal actually trying to make a hollow on purpose. For instance, a woodpecker. Woodpeckers make hollows in trees, and they don't do that by themselves actually. They start pecking into the wood and then they leave, and they get help from wood-eating fungi. They start eating the wood and it becomes soft, and then later woodpeckers come back and the fungi, they actually already made it easy for them because now the wood is really soft, and the woodpeckers go on to make the hollow. And hollows can develop in different ways too. And if a hollow is developed and it's really a hole in the wood, then this is a place where all kinds of organisms can live. The decaying biomass, all the detritus, all the decaying biomass of the wood, for instance, is already nourishment and energy for many organisms. So all kinds of fungi are going to come in, bacteria are going to come in, then over time small animals are going to come in, maybe little insects, and the bigger animals that live in a hollow, like our woodpecker for instance, they constantly bring in material. The woodpecker needs to bring in nest material if he wants to make his nest in there, brings in food, and of course they also leave their feces. They gotta go to the toilet. So energy is constantly brought into this hollow. And there, even after the big animals have left, it's again food for smaller organisms. So this is constantly repairing itself and regenerating itself. What's our design guideline? Preserve, repair, and improve the system by constantly adding energy and material. Hollows in our tree ecosystem are a very fascinating sub-ecosystem. They are a little place where all kinds of organisms live, and not only birds like woodpeckers, but also all kinds of mammals live in there. They are very important for many species of bats, for instance, and they are very important for many insects and smaller organisms. Very fascinating sub-ecosystem of our big ecosystem of the tree. Embody resilience through variation, redundancy, and decentralization. What's our example in nature for this principle? Our example is the soil system and the countless organisms that make up the system of soil. So the system of soil is an ecosystem that's alive, and it's made up of countless species that live in part of the system in the soil. Many of these species are not known to us humans. Many are. And we know that even in the forest next door, in the soil, there are countless species that live in there. Countless species of insects, countless species of spiders, of fungi, of bacteria, of worms, threadworms, on and on and on it goes. So there's big variation there. Species variation, diversity. And in a healthy soil, we also have a very high quantity of organisms. So not only are there many different species, from each and every species, there's a very big redundancy. We have a lot of earthworms living here. We have a lot of threadworms. We have a lot of bacteria. We have a lot of fungi. In one handful of healthy soil, there are more living organisms than all humans that live on Earth today, which is amazing. Only 1 cubic centimeter of soil, the threads of the fungi are as long as 1 kilometer if you span them out. So absolutely fascinating. That's the redundancy. There's so much of all of this life in the healthy soil system. And then everything is decentralized. There's not one spot where all the worms live, and one spot where all the bacteria live, and one spot over there where all the insects live. No, they're all decentralized over the entire soil system. And these three factors, the decentralization, the redundancy, and the variation, all make the system very resilient to any kind of sudden change or major disruption. So if one species somewhere maybe has a big problem and it dies out in one part, well, on the one hand, we have variation, we have many different species. So in a healthy soil system, there may be a different species that can actually take up a similar role, a similar function in the ecosystem than the other species did. And if many die on one spot, we have a high redundancy, so there are many other countless individuals who can take up the slack, basically, and everything is decentralized. So if there's a major disruption here, a healthy part of the soil can help to regenerate this part again. What's our design guideline here? In disruptions, maintain life functions by integrating multiple and similar forms, processes, and systems, whose existence is not mutually dependent on one another. Our soil system is, of course, a major part of our ecosystem of the tree. Our tree is only alive because it is part of this soil system, because of all of the processes that are happening in the soil. Cooperation with different fungi, cooperation with bacteria, all of the processes that are happening in the soil, the cyclic processes. And of course, just the simple fact that the tree is rooted in the soil and it gets its stability, it gets water and nutrients from the soil. So that was part 2. If you want to get the whole story, check out the other 5 videos about the life principles and our video, What is Biomimicry? Thanks. See you next time.